And now we're going to switch to my main presentation. The future of the mobile web, which is what you are all coming for. I've been doing browser compatibility stuff for a long time now, 12 years, I guess. And the desktop web was getting kind of boring for me, because nowadays all browsers support everything. Even IE, yes, even IE. That's great for you, but it's boring for me. You know, if I have to work on my compatibility tables and say, yes, it supports it, yes, it supports it, yes, it supports it, after half an hour I fall asleep and I think, okay, this is not fun anymore. So that's why I moved to the mobile web, where I have about 20 browsers, ranging from great to lousy. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. Plenty of other people will talk about the technical issues that are involved and the design issues that are involved with mobile. What I would like to do in my session is take a look ahead. Where is the mobile web heading? And you may be surprised. First of all, we have this discussion, native versus web. I'm sure you've heard about it. I will give you my opinion on that discussion. It's getting a bit boring. I mean, I was one of the people who started up this discussion a year and a half ago, and back at that time that was an excellent thing, because we actually needed to figure out what the border between native and web is. Meanwhile, I have the feeling that we're well on the way to finding out when we should use a native app and when we should use a web app. So my absolutely stunningly brilliant conclusion about the native versus web discussion is, it depends. Thank you. As far as I'm concerned, there's room for both. The only thing we have to do right now is figure out when to use which one. I'm not going to give you my opinion on that. You all have your own opinions. Several of the speakers may touch on this subject. What I'm trying to say here is this is a problem that we are currently solving. This is not something that we need to think about very deeply. It is something that will just, in about a year or year and a half or so, we'll say, why did we have this discussion anyway? It's clear when you should use the web and when you should use native. So that about native versus web. Let's take a very briefly look at native apps. What you're seeing here is the sales market share, not the browser market share, but the sales market share of the various smartphone operating systems from 2010. So Symbian is still pretty big. Of course, in this year, we'll see Symbian dwindle to about half of that. The point I'm trying to make here is that this is the theory of native apps, but the practice looks quite different. If you make a native app, 99% of the time you do just this. And that's what's wrong with the native part of the mobile world right now. But I think that's about to be solved. Part of the solution is, of course, HTML5 apps, which basically allow you to run on pretty much any device anywhere in the world. I mean, we're not quite there yet, but we are making giant strides here. I'm not going to talk too deeply about this either, but I do want to give you my definition of HTML5 apps. It's actually a quite elegant construction. You create one core application with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, just as if it's a website. And then you deploy it to several mobile platforms. And this deployment right now is the tricky part. Now, ideally, you make sure that the CSS and JavaScript is actually stored on the device so that the user, when he returns to your application, doesn't have to download them again, which is pretty important on a mobile connection. The trick is, if it can't be deployed, if the phone just doesn't support all that stuff, it's still a website, and people can still visit it. So that's the thing we're going to see. On the one hand, native apps, which I think are too much focused on iPhone and Android, but that's just my opinion. And on the other hand, HTML5 apps, we have still many technical problems, but it's going to work roughly like this. As I said, the deployment is the tricky part. So here's two tools that can help you. Apparatio from Uxebu and build.phonegap.com from Nitobi. I think Brian Leroux will talk at least about build.phonegap.com. And we also have a Uxebu speaker, Nikolai Onken. Maybe he will talk about Apparatio. But just take a look at it. They are actually services that will help you deploy your HTML5 app. Then one more very quick point about device APIs, which are totally important. And this is the main problem the web is facing right now. Native app offer device APIs. Basically, Luke already talked about it. It's a way of accessing the camera, the accelerometer, your SMS inbox and stuff like that. And it's basically necessary for the mobile context, the awareness that mobile can have of your location, your wishes, etc., etc. Web apps will eventually have to offer them too. The problem is they don't really right now. In the afternoon, Brian LaRue is going to talk a bit more about device APIs. But just remember, device API is the main problem we are facing in mobile web design right now. Because we need them, but they aren't actually there yet. Okay, so now I've discussed all the points I'm not going to talk about. What I am going to talk about is this guy. Who here has heard the story about the fisherman and how mobile changed his life? A few, but not many. I'm going to tell it now, so those few who know it will be bored for 2 minutes. There's this fisherman, somewhere in the developing world. And he goes to sea every day, catches his fish, returns to his village, sells it. Just like his father did before him, his grandfather did before him. The problem he was facing was that in advance he would never know exactly how much money he would earn by his catch, because he did not know how many other fishermen would return in time for evening dinner. So sometimes he would be the first one or the only one to return and make a lot of money, but at other times 5 or 6 fishermen would sail in at the same time and he would not make a lot of money. But that was basically how fishermen have lived for ages and ages and ages. Until he got a mobile phone. Because now that he has a mobile phone, when his ship goes back to land and comes in reach of the mobile network, he can start to call friends in several villages. He can say, hey, how much is this fish with you? And shall I take it to your village? Or no, you have a too low price, I go somewhere else. So he can actually figure out now where he will sell his catch for the most money. And that changed his life because he can now plan ahead. He can now say, okay, I'm going to maximize my profit. He doesn't actually say that in those words, of course, but it is what he's doing. Now, this is already happening all over the world. This is nothing new, especially at pure mobile conferences. Stories like this are told often. It's also told about farmers in Afghanistan. I've heard several more versions of it. The offshoot of it is that because they are now connected to the world at large, these people can make more rational decisions and can get information that's relevant to them. What I'd like to do is to take a peek into this fisherman's future. And the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of phone exactly is he using? Now, I'm not sure, of course, but I'm guessing it's something like this, a cheap Nokia. Why a Nokia? Because Nokia has an enormous sales market share in the developing world. 70% or something is nothing out of the ordinary. And a cheap phone because this fisherman doesn't have much money. This phone, I found it on the internet, is roughly $25. $25 is a lot of money for a poor fisherman in the developing world. He will have to save money for months on end in order to buy this phone. But it's a business investment. He knows once I have the phone, I can call to all kinds of villages and figure out where I sell my catch for the best price. So it's just an investment. He makes it, gets a phone, and makes a little more money. The point here is that phones are developing so fast. What we're going to see this year is the advent of the cheap Android phones. Some say they will cost $100, others say $50, so I took the average and say, okay, it will cost about $75. Now, $75 for this fisherman is too much money. He just plain can't afford that. But what will happen in a couple of years, these phones will go down in prices. I'm guessing around 2014, maybe 2015, they will be at a par with what the cheap Nokias are doing today. So by that time, he is able to afford a phone that can run apps. What kind of apps? I think they will be web apps. For the rest of my presentation, I'm going to assume he runs web apps on this phone. What does he do with an app? He may try to keep track of prices, historical price comparisons and stuff like that, right? He may figure out that every Thursday in that village there's always a lack of this kind of fish. So he may actually jump into that and say, okay, I'm going to catch something extra and bring it to that village on Thursday. Whatever. It's pattern seeking that he wants. Maybe, because he has more money now, he's able to afford an extra ship, or maybe 2 extra ships. And these have to be coordinated a little bit. He does want to know exactly where those ships should go to get the best price for the catch. And an app might help with that. He may need warning against corrupt police officers. There may be a certain police officer that comes into some towns and takes half your catch or half your money. And of course you want to avoid this man. So you need to know where he is and go somewhere else. Stuff like that. I mean, I made this up, and I'm not a fisherman at all, so I may be totally wrong. What I do think is going to happen is that someone who lives over there and who knows the fisherman business is going to figure out what kind of information need this fisherman is going to have. And he will create an app for that, and everybody will be happy. So, let's say the fisherman has an app that does exactly what he wants. He is totally happy with it. And let's say he's on a Nokia. It could also be an Android, doesn't really matter. It's a web app anyway. One day, he is visited by his cousin, who's also a fisherman. And what do you do when you have a brand new phone with brand new apps? You proudly show it off. So the fisherman says to his cousin, look what I have. I have this phone here. You see, it's a new Nokia. And it has this brilliant app that allows me to do this and that and that. And his cousin, who's also a fisherman, immediately appreciates that. And said, oh yeah, that is totally cool. I want that app too. I mean, that's what's happening here in the developed world. We all had situations like that. And it will equally happen over there, because humans are the same everywhere. There's one problem with the cousin. He doesn't have a Nokia, he has a Samsung. And the question now is not, will the app run on that Samsung, because it's a web app. And by that time, both Nokia and Samsung will have a decent browser on all their devices. So the application can actually run on that Samsung. That's not the problem. The problem is, how are we going to get it from the Nokia to the Samsung? Now, one obvious solution is App Store. It could work, I suppose. The problem here is that, first of all, app stores, in order to be able to buy something at an app store, you need a credit card. And in order to have a credit card, you need a bank account. And this fisherman and his cousin are too poor for a bank account. Secondly, even if somehow that was not a problem, the fisherman cannot really help his cousin here. Because the fisherman is used to the Nokia App Store, while his cousin is used to the Samsung App Store, or maybe hasn't seen it, or whatever. In any case, it's not quite as easy as having 2 iPhones and saying, oh, you go there in the App Store, you click there and you download it. It may be more complicated than that. And again, it may also be that the fisherman simply cannot afford to go to the App Store because he doesn't have a credit card. So App Stores are out of the question. Via the web, maybe. It's already possible to download apps via the web. It's certainly possible on Android once you uncheck one single checkbox. Lots of people are doing it, and it could be a solution. The problem is, I do not really think that this fisherman has a data plan, because the data plan is expensive. Even we, when we review our new data plan from our operators, say, oh, that's not really cheap. Which means there's basically far too much for our fisherman. So he probably will not have a data plan. His cousin won't either, so he can't download it from the web. So you can't download it from the App Store, you can't download it for the web. What remains? Bluetooth. I think that in the future, web apps will be exchanged phone-to-phone, peer-to-peer via Bluetooth. And this is not some vague kind of prophecy I'm doing, because I've actually done this 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was working a lot with Vodafone in Düsseldorf. And I mainly worked with this device, the Symbian E71. Or it's an E72, it's hard to tell the difference. Anyway. And I was working on what they call W3C widgets, which is a kind of HTML5 app, and I was writing test cases and stuff like that. So I had a lot of widgets there, and I ran them, and I discussed the results, etc., etc. That was my job. And then at a certain time, Microsoft was kind enough to send me a Windows Mobile device. Not Windows Phone, Windows Mobile. This was 2 years ago, remember. Windows Mobile 6.5. And Windows Mobile 6.5 is a lot better than Windows Mobile 6.1, but that's about everything you can say about it that is positive. Except for one thing. When I studied the specifications, it said supports W3C widgets. Wow, I said, I have to see that. So I took my Symbian device, went to a widget. I clicked send via Bluetooth, which is pretty easy on Symbian. I pointed it to my Windows mobile phone, and it worked. Almost. In principle, it worked fine. The only problem was a compatibility issue, not between the browsers, but between the widget managers. In a widget, you have to have a so-called manifest file, which basically says, hi, I'm a widget, and I need network access, and my width and height are this and that. It's a very simple XML file. You need only half an hour to really understand that. The problem was that, and I have to say this right, Microsoft required a certain attribute in that XML file, and Opera choked on it. Opera was the browser that ran on the Symbian widget manager. So that was a problem, but still, when I actually changed that attribute, put it back on the Symbian device, sent it from Symbian to Windows Mobile, it actually worked. In general, I thought this was a viable proof of concept. It's not even remotely ready for the world yet, because apart from this inconsistency between the widget managers, it is pretty hard to actually find the correct way of sending a widget via Bluetooth. But I still think this proves that this actually has a future. And I mean, wouldn't it be absolutely fabulous? You meet up with a friend of yours who has a cool new app that has a different phone than yours. And you say, I want that app too. And he says, okay, here you go, Bluetooth, bang, on your phone. It's a web app anyway, so it works. That's what we're heading to with the mobile web. So, let's take it as a given that the fisherman will exchange HTML5 apps over Bluetooth. Or maybe over NFC or some other direct peer-to-peer connection. I mean, don't get too hung up on Bluetooth itself, but some way of a direct connection phone to phone. That's all cool, but this app, especially this fisherman's app, is nothing without data from the cloud. How are we going to get the data from the cloud to the phone? First of all, something obvious. The data will likely be JSON. Why? Because it's one of the most lightweight data formats in existence, and lightweight is important on a mobile connection, especially if you're a poor fisherman who has to pay for everything, right? And for whom a data plan or any mobile plan is expensive. So it has to be lightweight, and of course it already works everywhere because it's just JavaScript, right? Any browser supports JSON, because JSON is deeply embedded into JavaScript itself. So both phones and the mobile apps on it will actually understand that JSON and send it on to the app. The point is, how do we actually get the JSON onto the phone? Wi-Fi? I do not think so. In theory, it would require the fisherman to have a Wi-Fi station on his boat. And I mean, that's expensive, and besides, how do you connect the Wi-Fi station to the actual internet when you're at sea, or even close to land? So that's not going to work. Data plan, I already talked about it. I think it's too expensive for our fishermen, and they just can't afford it. So what remains? SMS. That sounds about right. So I think part of the future of the mobile web will be JSON over SMS. What is important here is that SMS is right now the only way of actually pushing data to a mobile phone. Well, yeah, also a voice call, of course. But this is data we're talking about, not voice. And that is important, especially, for instance, in the example with the corrupt police officer. Because it could be that the corrupt police officer suddenly turns up at a village, and then a message has to be sent immediately to all the fishermen, watch out, don't go to that village. And that requires push. I mean, what you don't want as a fisherman is your phone constantly polling some server, because that eats battery life, and you cannot actually recharge a phone while you're at sea. So that's also something to think about. Secondly, Premium SMS already exists everywhere, and it allows the service to make money. I mean, once we actually have such a service that offers information via web apps to fishermen, there's somebody somewhere sitting in an office collating all that data and creating a system, and that somebody wants to make money. And premium SMS is a pretty easy way of making money, because it already exists everywhere, it works, you just have to set it up with your operator. And of course, nearly every phone supports SMS, which is also important. I think 97% of the phones, of all the 4.5 billion phones or something on the world, support SMS. So there you go. And finally, the combination of JSON and SMS is more or less human readable. So even if you don't have the app, you could read this. You could. It's not easy, it's not user-friendly, but in a totally emergency you can read this and figure out where to sell your catch, right? There's a problem, there's two problems actually with JSON over SMS. The first one is cost, because the operators are too greedy. SMS is their cash cow. You pay a lot for SMS. I mean, to us it may not seem a lot of money, but especially to fishermen in the developing world, it's a lot of money. And when you use premium SMS, you even spend more money because you also have to pay the one who offers the service. So we could say maybe prices will go down, maybe operators will suddenly have this revelation that they should be more nice to their customers. I don't actually think it will happen, but in theory it could happen. It could also be that we are going to use something else instead of SMS, and something interesting is happening there. I think it will be some sort of instant messaging. BlackBerry, of course, has a very popular instant messaging program, which runs on all BlackBerries. And I don't know if you noticed, but a couple of months ago they announced they were also going to run that on Android and iOS, which basically means that they are going to port their instant messaging to, well, first of course, the most popular mobile platforms, but why stop there? Why not go down to S40 and all the other feature phone operating systems? So some sort of instant messaging service may take over from SMS because the operators are too greedy. Could happen. As long as it's a push medium, that's important, and as long as you can charge for it. As long as the service provider can easily make some money out of all of this. There's a second problem with JSON over SMS, that's illiteracy. This is a more generic problem, of course, for all kinds of web apps. You could, I suppose, try to solve it with images instead of text. You could, in theory, send an MMS instead of an SMS and do something like this. I mean, numbers are more easy to learn than letters, right? So I'm kind of expecting that most fishermen will understand numbers but not letters, but see the image. You could solve it like that. You could also solve it with a kind of a voice-over app, whatever. In any case, this is not a fundamental problem. It has to be solved, but we have several possible solutions here, and we can work towards what works best. So that's part of the future of the mobile web. Let's talk about money for a little while. I don't know if you notice what we've done here, but we've basically turned around the entire mobile ecosystem on its head. Because what we're doing here is sharing apps freely via Bluetooth. You don't pay for that, yeah? Direct phone to phone. Instead, we actually pay for the data we receive. And data can be anything, right? It can be JSON over SMS, but it could also be that you receive a free game on your phone. And it has 3 levels or something. You like the game, so you say, okay, I'll buy 3 more levels. I'll make a data connection and I will download it somehow, and you pay for those levels and not for the app itself. So what they call monetization is going to change considerably over the next few years. Basically, we do not need the app stores anymore for this kind of stuff. We may need them for something else, but basically the inevitability of app stores is eroding. Eric Meyer already said it. It's not really web-like. And that's what I'd like to discuss now. Exactly what do app stores do for us? What we're seeing here, these are the traditional 3 arguments in favor of app stores, right? They organize your distribution, your discoverability, and your payments, which is true as far as it goes. There are, however, 2 other things that are not often talked about, and that is the cost of ownership of an app store It costs a lot of money to maintain an app store. And secondly, app stores work for Apple. We can all agree on that. But will it work for anyone else? Everybody is assuming that it will, but I haven't seen any hard data to back that up. So let's talk about distribution for a little bit. Distributing your app is all fine, but you can also do that via the web. You cannot on the iPhone, but that is because Apple made the deliberate decision to close down the iPhone and to lock it and to make sure that you can only download it via the App Store. But with unlocked iPhones, you can download it over the web. With Android, you can download it over the web. With other OSs, I suppose you can too, though I haven't researched that personally. So what I'm saying here, the distribution advantage of the App Store is not a natural advantage. It's basically Apple forcing everybody through the App Store because it fits their business model. So I'm not too happy with the distribution argument. Discoverability. The App Store allows your application to be discovered by potential users, which is also true as far as it goes. But suppose you create an application and you submit it to the Apple App Store and it has to compete with 300,000 other apps. How in hell is anyone ever going to find your app in that vast sea of stuff, right? There are actually some answers to that question. You could just start up a traditional marketing campaign. Hey, download our app from the Apple App Store. That will work, of course, because lots of people will see it. Or you can basically buy a spot in the top 10 page or whatever portal page the App Store has, which is also possible. Both options cost you a lot of money. So it's only available to large corporations who just have a large marketing budget. Right? The independent developer getting wealthy from stuff he submits to the App Store is a myth. There is just not enough money in the App Store economy. Which brings us to our third thing, payments. The App Store arranges payments for you, and that works. I mean, Apple and Google and RIM and Nokia and all of them take their cut, of course. But once that's done, you actually get the money, and it works. But the problem here is, I said it before, the whole billing thing of app stores works with credit cards. And what we'll eventually get is operator billing, which basically means that for anything on the web, and maybe also on native, you will, let's say you go to a website, a news website, and you see an interesting article, you click on the link, and the news website said, yeah, you can read this article, but it'll cost you 3 cents. You click yes. You confirm the payment, and that 3 cents is added to your operator bill, which you are receiving anyway each month. Alternatively, it could be deducted from your prepaid account. Wouldn't that be a much simpler way of arranging payments than the whole credit card business? Especially when the credit card business excludes 50 to 60% of the entire world's population who do not have a credit card, right? So payments work in the App Store, no doubt about it, but I don't think it's the future of payments, especially not for the mobile web. Something else about payments. What is the most advanced country in the world when it comes to mobile payments? Do you know? No, not Brazil. Excuse me? Kenya. In Kenya right now, about 25% of the gross domestic product is sent and received via SMS. That's because one of the operators in Kenya saw very early on that this was a huge growth opportunity, and they created a service called M-Pesa. Originally they marketed it, this is the successful young guy who's gone to the city and has gotten a good job, and this is his poor old mother in the countryside, and now he can send money from phone to phone to his mother, while previously even this young successful guy couldn't afford a credit card or a bank account. Besides, even if he did, his mother's village wouldn't have a bank anywhere near. But now he can send his mother money via the phone, and his mother can pay her bills with that. So that's happening in Kenya right now, and it shows much clearer than the app stores where the actual payment ecosystem of the mobile web is heading. There is an excellent article in depth online. If you want it, tell me later on, I'll give you a link. I have to search for the link myself. So, that much about payments. Cost of ownership. Think about what an app store needs. All this stuff. It needs a payment system, we already talked about it. But okay, so they do it with credit cards, so they need somebody in a suit to talk to credit card companies and banks, right? And those people cost money. They need sysadmins to actually keep the system up. They need content checkers, Basically, okay, you have submitted an app. Is it safe? Doesn't it do illegal stuff, etc.? People actually have to be employed in order to do that. You need writers about documentation and best practices for people who want to create apps. And you need hosting, and hosting can be a pretty big expense, especially for popular app stores. Now, I do not doubt that Apple is making a healthy profit, but I do doubt that the average app store makes a healthy profit. You know how many app stores there are nowadays? Over 100. And there is absolutely no way that more than a few of those app stores will actually make money after they've paid for all this. So the cost of ownership is pretty high, and you just need income, of course. And some companies, especially Apple, do have that income. But I doubt that the average mobile company will make money from their app store. It will cost them money. Finally, the App Store works for Apple. We can all agree on that. They make shitloads of money. Everybody's totally enthusiastic about it, submits apps, etc., etc. The point is, will it work for anyone else? Because once you think about it, why does it work for Apple? First of all, because it works well, of course. But secondly, because Apple has a kind of a natural advantage over all the other companies. Because they have leverage both with developers and with consumers. All the developers in the world were totally amazed by iOS when it came out, and they ran to the App Store and wanted to submit stuff and build iOS stuff, etc., etc. And Apple, of course, cleverly marketed that. And Apple has a leverage with developers, and it used it to the max. It has the same kind of leverage with consumers. The average Apple consumer is more affluent than the average consumer in total. So basically, what Apple did here, say, okay, developers, you can develop your stuff on an excellent operating system for the wealthiest part of the world. Because that's what it basically amounts to. These people have money and they're willing to spend it on apps, which is great for Apple and which works for Apple. But will it work for anyone else? Now, Google. Google absolutely has leverage with developers. If Google announces something new, I'm assuming most of you have followed the Google I/O news from earlier this week. If Google develops something new, developers also line up to try to use it and say, oh yeah, this is great, I want to use it. But Google does not really have leverage with consumers yet. Think back to it. When they launched Android, developers were enthusiastic and mobile trend watchers were enthusiastic, but they actually had to team up with Samsung and HTC and a few others in order to get Android devices on the market. They tried it with their Google Nexus 1 and it was a miserable failure, selling it directly to consumers. It could be that Google will find a way to appeal to consumers. It might very well be, but right now they don't really have the leverage in consumer land that Apple does. Exactly the opposite goes for the traditional powers in mobile. Nokia, Samsung, RIM, the smaller ones. They have leverage with consumers because consumers have been using their product for ages and are generally satisfied and want a new one. But they have less of a leverage with developers. Sure, there are BlackBerry developers, there are Symbian developers, there are developers for whatever old operating systems Samsung used. But these tend to be fairly static, and one of the great challenges, especially for Nokia and BlackBerry, is to grow their pool of developers. So basically what we're seeing here is that all of the other mobile companies are struggling to get the same advantages as Apple has with both developers and consumers. It could be that that changes, of course. I mean, all of the mobile companies are, of course, working towards a situation where they do have the same leverage as Apple, but it hasn't happened yet. Right now, none of them has both, which leads me to think, okay, the App Store is great for Apple, but will it be great for any of the others? Which brings us to the tricky topic of the end of the app stores. I don't think the app stores will actually end. I just think that, that their default status as something you need in order to be a mobile developer will end. But app stores themselves will continue to survive. First of all, of course, Apple's App Store will survive because iOS continues to have its lockdown and you can only download native apps from the App Store. And that will remain the same and it will work and Apple will make a lot of money. That won't change. I'm guessing that a few other platform-specific app stores will also survive. I'm especially thinking again of Google, Nokia and RIM because they have enough market share. basically. When you're not Apple, it basically comes down to market share. Do I have enough consumers, enough developers to create interesting stuff? So they might survive. But the other 96 app stores, I don't know. I don't know. I doubt it. What we will see is the rise of specialized app stores. If you're enthusiastic about it, structural engineering, music creation, historical maps, whatever. Myself, I'm a historical map freak. I would love to have a specialized app store about that. If there's someone who actually creates and curates such an app store, and if the app store doesn't have too many apps, basically if I can scroll through the entire list of apps in about 5 minutes or something, then you might be onto something. Then you might say, okay, I've got this very specialized app store that really, the people that are interested in this stuff will come there and will buy their apps there. They might even be able to survive financially. So this, I think, is where app stores are heading. I think that the totally central position they have right now in the mobile ecosystem will fade away. Because, well, basically of everything that I sketched during this presentation. Native apps will be replaced by web apps. Not all native apps, of course, but many of them. Because until now, native has been the default option and web the secondary option. And I think that might reverse in the next year, that web becomes the default option and you do native only after you've actually thought about it and decided that you actually need native. We need device APIs. Apps will be shared, the apps themselves will be shared via Bluetooth or a similar mechanism. Web data, I guess, will also be offered by SMS. You can, of course, if you are wealthy enough to have a data plan, you can go to the server and download your data, just as we do today. But especially for poor fishermen in the developing world, we need something like SMS or another instant messaging system. You pay for the content and not for the app, and that, I think, is the most important rule here. In the future, creating apps themselves will not make you any money. Creating content will, which is actually pretty much the same as is happening right now on the web, right? Content is king. Then why, in the mobile space, are apps and UX kings instead of content? You will pay for the content and not for the app. And the app stores will go on the defensive. I'm a bit careful here. I don't think the app stores will actually totally disappear, but they will be on the defensive and they will have to prove that they have something useful to add to the mobile ecosystem. So, that basically is the end of my presentation. I hope I've given you a little overview of what's going on, what will be going on the next 3 to 5 years in the mobile web. I could, of course, be wrong about absolutely anything, because I'm looking into the future, and looking into the future is not an exact science. But I hope I've given you some food for thought about the whole mobile web thingy. How much time do we have left for questions? 20 minutes? No, come on, that's not possible. I will check it myself. 20 minutes. Okay, wow, that went fast. Thank you so much for your attention. I will take questions now. I saw a few raised hands during my presentation, so if you can raise them again, please. Nobody has questions? I've been crystal clear. Here's a question, here in front.
Hello. So my question is, imagine, okay, app stores will disappear, most of them. And people still will need some ways to discover apps. So there will be a move from app stores to some app catalogs.
It could be that we get catalogs, but basically if you think about web content, we already have a catalog for web content, and it's called the search engine.
Yeah, so maybe search engines will be capable of finding an app for you.
Yes.
Yeah, and going further, since payments, it's a great idea. You can pay for your app, on your bill or your, prepaid. But are there any, works being done in progress, or maybe some initiatives which are focused on this particular payment systems? Like
yes.
You have a website, you have a link which your operator, you might be abroad, so the operator is different. Yep. He might want to know that you have bought something. some kind of callback to servers of the operator or something like that?
Yes. Basically, the question is, operator billing is all good and well, but is there any actual initiative? The answer is yes, but it goes very slowly. You have the WAC, Wholesale Application Community. It's where 68 operators around the world have united in order to specify device APIs, which Brian LaRue is going to talk about a bit more, and in order to do something about the payments. Basically, they see the same as you do. It's all fun, but we need a system, especially when you think about the average developer. Suppose you are a web app developer and you want to make money, then you actually have to make sure that you get the money that the operators collect for you, right? So you have to have a contract with something. But what you don't want is contacting 68 operators separately and signing 68 contracts, right? What you want is just a one-stop shop where you go and say, I want to be on this system. So that basically is what the wholesale application community could be doing. Unfortunately, they're a bit slow about everything. They've been talking about it for, I don't know, more than a year now. The device API stuff is actually there, but the mobile payment stuff isn't, as far as I'm concerned. And the problem here is rather fundamental. We again come back to the position of the operators in the mobile landscape. In theory, the operators could be great helps for us web developers because of payments and similar stuff. In practice, they're not so much because the operators have no fucking clue what they're doing. Sorry to be so harsh, but it's actually the truth here. We've seen that countless times. What operators try to do time and again is create some content strategy. Why would you want content from your operator? Your operator is actually there to connect you to stuff and to organize payments for you and stuff like that, but not for content. So they don't understand their actual role in the mobile ecosystem right now, and that is the biggest problem we're facing. What I personally think will happen is the operators start to understand that they need some sort of payment system, a worldwide payment system. They will start to work on it, but it will go slow, and there will be political issues, and this and that. I mean, the operator world is highly politicized. At a certain moment, suddenly some other company, not an operator, will actually deploy a payment system. What I'm personally guessing that might happen is that Google could start to sell SIM cards. Once they do that, and they offer a good payment system for developers, they're sure to win. Incidentally, if that happens, if Google or anyone starts to make SIM cards and you can actually do payments for it, it won't be long until our laptop and desktop computers also have a SIM card slot for payments, right? So, right now, there is not really a system in place. I'm talking about the future here. Various parties understand what they have to do, but they haven't actually done it yet. And it needs to be kick-started, with the emphasis on kick. So that is basically my answer to your question. Any more questions? There's one over there.
So you spoke about like downloadable web apps, but what do you think about web apps rather in the browser instead? Especially if you spoke about finding them through Google or whatever. If I find an app, I'm not sure I want to necessarily, go to the extra step of downloading it and then I check for another app and I have to download it.
Well, let's put it like this. If you create your HTML5 apps, web apps, whatever, really properly, you can use it as an app, but also as a website. Which basically means that you can use it on any phone that has a decent browser. And right now, everybody in the mobile world is convinced that their phone must have a decent browser. So that's no problem. So basically what I think will happen, but again, I'm guessing here. What I think will happen is you want something, you just start a Google search or a Bing search or whatever. You find something and you kind of hope it's a web app that you can actually install on your phone. Sometimes it will be a normal website. You're out of luck then. But why not? I mean, web app is not something absolute. The iPhone and many other phones support app cache, which basically means you download a website normally totally as if it's a website. But the website contains a manifest file that again say, dear phone, please store these and these and these and these files locally. And then you already have a web app, while it's a normal website. Because the whole trick about web apps versus websites is not the functionality, but it's how much of the stuff you can store on the phone itself, so that it will be quicker to start up the next time you use it. That will be the defining principle of web apps. I hope this answers your question a bit.
I mean, you mean that the border between browser and OS somehow will blur more?
Yes, I think so, definitely. The border between browser and OS will blur a bit more. We've seen that with Chrome OS, of course. Basically, the browser will become all pervasive. Of course, you can still run native apps on your phone, no problem with that. You have to continue to support that. But basically, if it's not a native app, it's a web app, which means that the browser has to be able to start up in any kind of condition. And in fact, you can already create native apps which are really web apps, which is just a web app with a native skin around it. Right? And that does start up a browser instance. The question, of course, is whether that browser instance you start to run a true web app is exactly the same as the browser you use to browse normal web pages. And that is something I will have to figure out. Lucky me. Thank you so much. But yes, definitely it's going to blur. There's an, yeah?
Hey, I'm wondering if we're going to see APIs that'll let us, from the client side, access SMS directly, or because we can do it on the server side. But my question is, things like M-Pesa use a UI that's through the SMS interface itself, the user sends messages back and forth.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, in fact, we'll be able to layer a UI on top of that and make the actual transport of the data through SMS more transparent.
The answer to your question is yes. Device APIs include a functionality that allows you to access your SMS inbox, your address book, and that allows you to send the SMSs and get a notification if you receive SMSs. So yes, definitely. The only problem, of course, here is security. Because what we don't want is go to a random website and 10 minutes later figure out that that website has sent 200 SMSs to all your contacts with some spam in it. That's something we have to avoid. So yes, definitely this is absolutely going to be part of the mobile experience, because you must be able to access voice, SMS, your address book and other basic mobile stuff, but there is a security issue here, so it will take a little longer. There's a question here.
You talked about pushing data over SMS or IM. What about the availability of IM?
What about that?
Availability of the IM application. Do you predict that those IM applications like the one on BlackBerry will be available across mobile platforms? Or because I think that pushing data or content, especially relative content, is the future of the web. So do you believe that will happen across all platforms in the near future?
In the near future?
Yes.
It depends basically on what's going to happen with SMS. Because what we should do for a moment is think platform agnostic, right? We have data which has to go to a client, and it has to go not over the web, but over some kind of instant messaging system. SMS is the most obvious choice right now, because 97% of the phones support it. But the problem here is cost. It all depends on what the operators do. They could say, as I said earlier, okay, we're going to slash the SMS costs so that it will become much cheaper, and if they do that, SMS will remain the default, and the other instant messaging systems won't have a chance. If, however, the operators decline to do that and just continue to charge as much money for SMS as they do right now, then people will start to look for an alternative. I mean, that's basically what the BlackBerry youth users do. They want to constantly be in touch with each other, via SMS, except that SMS is too expensive. So instead, they take a BlackBerry and use the BlackBerry ping system, which allows them to send SMSs for free. Not really for free, but for significantly less money than real SMSs. So we're already seeing it there. The question is now, and I can't answer that question, the question is, will that spread to the entire mobile ecosystem? And I just plain don't know. It all depends on the operators. But it could happen.
Because I'm talking in terms of, let's say you have a web app, and you have, let's say, 10,000 customers, and you want to push content to them.
Oh, like that?
Yes.
SMS is, it's basically the same story.
Yes.
I mean, what I'm saying now is SMS marketing is really great. I haven't personally experienced that, but several mobile people whom I highly regard say, yeah, SMS marketing is the future, because you will get tailored SMSs. You'll only get advertisement about stuff you care about. I mean, there's one guy, Tommy Ahonen, whom you should all follow. He basically says that SMS marketing will, after he receives it, the user will beg for more. And I don't know if that's true, but at least it's an interesting point of view. Again, think platform agnostic. SMS is just a platform, and you could easily use instant messaging, BlackBerry instant messaging, Nokia instant messaging, whatever. So we should decouple the marketing sense it makes to run an SMS campaign and the actual data layer that you use to send the SMSs. But I mean, for marketing, it's the same. Well, you have to use instant messaging. Okay, we use instant messaging. Who cares? We don't care about SMS. We care about getting our tailored message to our users.
This was not about marketing. This is about content. You know, pushing content, relevant content. Let's say you want to transmit data to the customer, relevant to them. You know, in order to complete your check-in process, you have to do this. So you want to avoid SMS, let's say, for cost's sake. Mm-hmm. And you want to push that via IM.
Okay.
What do you do in case you don't know the customer has the IM client?
It's about basically, does the customer's phone support the IM? Right. It's very simple. If it doesn't, you use SMS anyway. That's my gut feeling answer, right? You somehow try to detect whether the customer runs an IM service you can use. If you can't, you send an SMS. And basically, it will cost the customer more money, but that's the customer's own choice. Because he can also buy a slightly more expensive phone that they can download an IM app to and save money on the data he receives. So I think that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's exactly the same as in web development. Does the browser support JavaScript or not? You just detect that, and if it does support it, you add a layer on top of it. And it's the same with SMS and IM. You try IM first because it's cheaper. And if the phone turns out not to support IM, you go to SMS. So I think that's what will happen.
Thank you.
There's a question here.
Hi. So I come from Brazil, which is a country with very serious money problems for a lot of people. And a trend we're seeing is the cost of 3G is going down really fast. So right now we have 3G, unlimited 3G for $0.25 a day. $1 a day. So what I'm wondering is what do you think would happen, how the mobile landscape would change if 3G were the way to go?
We're going to?
If 3G was the way to go, so if it became so cheap that the fishermen could use it.
That's very simple. Once 3G becomes so cheap that even the fishermen can use it, we'll have more data. Basically, what we're doing right now, Jason Grigsby said that very nicely. He said something like, we have created the web in our image, and in America, our image is obese. Fat. We are pushing far too much data right now. I mean, traditional computers can handle it, of course, no problem. But we are running into problems with mobile devices now, exactly because the 3G connection is relatively expensive. But basically what I think will happen is once 3G becomes cheap enough to be really affordable, we'll see the same cycle all over again. We'll start to build larger mobile websites with more stuff and with extra videos and whatever. And we'll have to go through the entire cycle again, because don't forget, 4G is coming. Or they call it LTE now, I'm not sure why, but it's 4G in any case. It will again be faster than 3G. So even if 3G becomes the default, we'll still have plenty of customers on 4G, which will be more expensive, which will be faster. So basically the amount of data we can send to customers will rise, definitely. I just don't know how fast. That is basically my reply. Then we've reached the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.